Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Before we get into this week's topic, we just wanted to say that we are in the last few days of our Dungeons of Drakkenheim Kickstarter, which has sponsored this week's episode.
Dungeons of Drakkenheim is a campaign module for characters leveled 1 to 13, set within a ruined dark fantasy city.
Kelly and I have taken all the adventures that Wade played through in our live stream campaign, which aired here on YouTube and Twitch, and transformed that into an adventure that you can run at your game table, where your player characters will explore the ruins of a dark fantasy city which has been devastated by a mysterious otherworldly cataclysm. The city is now a contaminated wasteland, haunted by horrific monsters and battled over by 5 rival factions.
We have written a very open-ended campaign, so if you have watched Dungeons of Drakkenheim or are thinking of checking it out, if you don't like the choices that the characters made in that campaign, you can make entirely different ones, choosing which factions are going to be your allies and which ones are going to be your enemies, and what path you are going to carve and what problems you might face in the city is completely up to you and the choices you make.
Not only is the campaign an open-ended sandbox, there are so many things for you to use, even if you aren't planning on running this campaign yourself. All the locations that we've detailed in the city can simply be pulled out right from Drakkenheim and slammed into whatever campaign world, city, or game that you might be running as a one-shot or a two-shot. We've created new spells, magic items, monsters, and a whole game subsystem for eldritch contamination and mutations that you can also take and use in your very own campaign.
There are only a few days left in our Kickstarter, and we have been blown away by the support of the community. We've blown past so many of our stretch goals, which has allowed us to unlock new content to put into the book and a lot of extra goodies for all of you backers out there. We're so excited to share this world with you, and we're so excited that we have been able to partner with Ghostfire Gaming to really bring this to life as a module for you to run at your own table.
So follow the links in the description below or hit up Drakkenheim.com to back the campaign today on Kickstarter. There's just a few days left, so be sure to get in it while you can.
And now, let's go on to this week's episode.
So today, this is part 3 of our subclass tier rankings for the Fighter in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And we are going to place a particular spotlight today on the 2 new subclasses introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, the Psi Warrior and the Rune Knight.
If you look on the screen right now, you're going to see the criteria that we use to rank the subclasses. We are pitting the subclasses against each other and not those of other classes. Also keep in mind that although we may talk about multi-classing or role-playing lightly, these are not major components of our ranking.
When we rank our subclasses, we look at all components of the game, not just combat. We think about how the subclass augments the base class in problem-solving situations, exploration, interactions situations, how it bolsters the rest of the party, and how it fits into the overall adventure. So while combat efficacy is definitely something that is in our mind, especially when we are looking at the Fighter, which is a very combat-focused class as a whole, we do want to be thinking about all the ways that we could use these abilities outside of just bashing some skulls.
So with that, let's get started with discussing the Psi Warrior. This is a fighter that combines the psychic abilities and has a little bit of a flavor to me of a Jedi Knight.
When your mind awakens and you become a Psi Warrior, your fighter gains these psionic power dice. They have a number of dice equal to twice their proficiency modifier, and these dice start out as a d6, but they level up as you level up, and so not only do you get more of them, but the dice goes from a d6 to a d8 to a d10 to eventually a d12. These dice come back when you finish a long rest, but you can, once per short rest, spend a bonus action to regain one of them. So you got a pretty good pool to last you through the day and some ability to get them back, because you're going to be using these to power basically every other ability that you get from the subclass, because generally you expend one of these dice to activate one of these powers, and in some cases you'll roll that die to determine how effective the effect is.
At third level, you're going to gain 3 options for how to use your psychic powers. You're going to gain Protective Field, which allows you to reduce damage as a reaction. You also gain Psionic Strike, which allows you to add additional force damage to your attack. And finally, you have Telekinetic Movement, where you can move a willing creature 30 feet to an unoccupied space.
It's important to note that telekinetic movement requires your action to activate, and with the other abilities, you get to roll the psionic die and add your intelligence modifier either to the damage that you reduce or the damage that you cause. And with the psionic strike, you can only apply this once per turn, so even if you action surge and make a bunch of attacks, you can only add that extra damage on one of those attacks.
At 7th level, you're going to gain Telekinetic Adept, which adds 2 more abilities to the uses of your psionic dice. You now have Telekinetic Leap and Telekinetic Thrust. The Leap gives you a limited fly, which is really just like the name describes, a leap, because you can only use it until the end of your turn, so you need to land. So you're not really flying, you're just jumping with style. Telekinetic Thrust augments your Psychic Strike, allowing you to knock the creature prone or push them 10 feet.
They do get to make a saving throw, which relies on your intelligence modifier to determine the DC against this power. Then at 10th level, you're going to gain a Guarded Mind. You have resistance to psychic damage, and if you start your turn charmed or frightened, you can expend one of your psionic energy die to end whatever effect is causing that condition on you.
At 15th level, you gain Bulwark of Force. This allows you to shield you and your allies and give them half cover for 1 minute. If you want to use this feature more than once, you can expend one of your psionic die to use it again.
Finally, at 18th level, you become a Telekinetic Master and can actually cast the Telekinesis spell as an action by expending one of your psionic energy dice. Once telekinesis is in effect, if you continue to use it to move an object or a creature or someone else around, it then also lets you attack as a bonus action when you move something with telekinesis. And again, you can continue to cast telekinesis by expending more psionic energy die.
So I played a Psi Warrior for one of our Untold Tales, and it was an absolute blast. But as I read over this subclass, one thing that I do notice is if I'm comparing it to the other fighter subclasses, I do think that this is a blast to play. I do think that it has a really cool sort of theme to it, and it really does bring that theme to life. However, I do think that when I look at it, it's not as great as the Battle Master Fighter. I feel like it has a similar vibe where you're gaining all of these useful abilities and you can expend dice on your turn to use those abilities. So it kind of does feel a little bit like it's following in the path of a Battle Master with a different flavor, different theme, but slightly less potent in what it's capable of doing. I do think also if we compare it to something like the Eldritch Knight, it's close, but the Eldritch Knight has some really cool and potent abilities that I just think push it above what the Psi Warrior has to offer. Do I think this is a great subclass? Yes. Do I think it's iconic and deserves to be in Dungeons & Dragons? 100% yes. Do I think it's an S tier? No. Do I think it's an A tier? Maybe. I'm leaning more towards giving this a B, I think. I think that I was struggling between whether it was a low A or a high B, but I think in the grand scheme of fighter archetypes and what's presented, remember that a B subclass is still potent in the right campaign or with the right group of people. And I do believe the Psi Warrior has a great place at the table, but it's just not the most potent option, and I do think a B really speaks to what it offers.
Yeah, unlike the Eldritch Knight or the Battle Master, I don't see all the different building options that I can do here, right? The psionic energy die mechanic seems unique, but it's really similar to the Battle Master feature with far fewer options. And that alone de-elevates it, right? If this subclass had as many varied and diverse options for how to use its psionic energy die as the Battle Master, it could very well be an S tier, because then there would be more options for how we could use these abilities. We would get into the meat of like, oh, well, if you choose this ability, you could do this, but if you choose this ability, you could do this. You don't have that kind of choice or versatility here, right? It's just you get to deal extra damage, you could reduce damage, you can move things with your mind. all of those things are good, but it doesn't kind of give us the character building options that we see with subclasses like the Battle Master and the Eldritch Knight. And character building options are a worthwhile thing to have in your pocket of choices. And when we don't get choices for character building options, we want to see stuff that's really, really strong, right? And the stuff here is good, but it's not mind-blowing, right? It's not like, we got psychic powers here, but like we're not making any heads explode with them.
Yeah, I do think that if we're talking about even outside of combat, I do think that ability to move objects has actually... I used it in our Untold Tales to great effect for problem solving. And I think that there are a lot of fun problem solving uses for a psionic warrior, using things like telekinesis or the ability to move your characters. I actually think the moving objects and characters is one of the most useful and versatile options.
Unequivocally, especially because it doesn't really specify a weight limit. And that was one of the things that surprised us when we used it in our game. I remember being like, can I move this 2,000-pound stone sarcophagus? And I'm like, it's a large object. So technically, yes. So the kind of the loose wording of that ability makes it pretty powerful.
Yeah.
But it's a very specific environmental thing.
So, are we in agreement then that this is a B subclass?
I think so. I think it's a B.
Yeah. I do think, again, that this is a really potent and really fun subclass and does speak to a very certain aesthetic that a lot of people are going to really enjoy playing at the table. But it doesn't blow up any heads.
It kind of reads like how you would nerf the Battle Master.
Yeah.
Right. If you think the Battle Master is too powerful, then, which I don't. I think the Battle Master is just great, but like it definitely is very clearly a shackled down Battle Master. It doesn't have quite the flexibility as other things. I do like that the psionic strike and the psionic thrust does give you a really reliable means to knock somebody prone and knock them over and get advantage and stuff like that. But it just is pretty limited overall.
I will say, though, that this, if it's a worse Battle Master, it is also a better Arcane Archer.
Yeah, I'll give it that, for sure.
Yeah, because Arcane Archer also tried to do that thing where it adds in, here are some options on what you can do with your arcane shots, but it was extremely limited, whereas this does feel more open-ended than that. Mm-hmm. So I feel like it's more potent, it's better, but yeah, B feels right.
I feel like, again, if there were like 5 or 6 more things that you could do with your psionic energy dice, this would really hum.
In the next book of everything, let's see more psionic abilities.
Yeah.
So as we move on to the Rune Knight, this is a warrior who carves eldritch runes onto their armor and gear and weapons to really amplify them in combat and do really cool arcane and potent abilities.
This feels like something that is very like strongly associated with giants. It's in the flavor, but also feels like dwarven magic or like what the Goliaths would practice. I think there's a lot of really cool role-playing flavor here, and the idea of etching runes into your armor is really a classic fantasy archetype. So let's see if it plays that way.
So right off the bat, at 3rd level, you're going to gain proficiency with Smith's tools, and you can now learn Giant. You can speak and read it, and
fantasy fulfilled.
Yeah, that fits right in. Yeah. You grew up with giants, probably.
So the big feature that we're going to get here at 3rd level, this is actually only the second of 3 things that we get at 3rd level, is the Rune Carver ability. This is an ability that immediately when you gain it, you learn 2 out of the 6 different runes. And interestingly enough, if you miss this at your first glance, the 6 runes that you get all correspond to these 6 different types of giants. So we have the Frost, Fire, Stone, and Cloud giants, and those are the 4 that you can select from right away at 3rd level. And then the Hill Giant and the Storm Giant, which ironically are the strongest and the weakest of the giants, are not unlocked until 7th level when you can choose them. Over the course of your character's career, over the 20 levels, you'll start with 2, but eventually you'll be able to learn 5 out of the 6. So there's only one that you kind of have to say, that's the one I don't like. The runes, you etch them onto a weapon or armor or something that you're wearing or carrying, and all of them have a passive effect that works until your next long rest. So they're basically always on, but then all the runes can be invoked in some way, which might be a bonus action, sometimes an action or a reaction or no action, and then they cause an effect, which can be used once, and then usually you have to wait till you finish a short rest to invoke the rune again.
One of the interesting things with the wording of this ability is that if you have multiple runes engraved on multiple pieces of your gear, one of them might involve a reaction, one of them a bonus action, and one of them no action. You can actually use all three within a given turn. There's no limit to that, but you can only use each one once. Still, this does open up some really cool combos and effects that you can kind of use together. Why don't we briefly go over the runes and kind of give a quick example of what they do?
So the Cloud Rune passively gives you advantage on Deception and Sleight of Hand checks, and it allows you to spend a reaction to redirect an attack magically from one target to another.
The Fire Rune allows you to double your proficiency with tools, which hopefully is handy in your campaign. And you invoke the rune when you hit somebody with an attack, allowing you to deal out extra damage that then applies fiery shackles to the creature. The fiery shackles restrain them and keeps them in place, which means that you can now just hit them with your sword a bunch.
The target does get to make saving throws to negate the restraining effect or break out of them, but while they're shackled in place, they have disadvantage on their attacks, and you get to have advantage on attacks against them. The Frost Rune gives you advantage on intimidation and animal handling checks, and you can invoke it as a bonus action to give you a +2 bonus to strength and constitution based saving throws and ability checks for 10 minutes.
The Stone Rune gives you dark vision out to 120 feet and advantage on insight checks. Also, if an enemy ends its turn within 30 feet of you, you can use a reaction to invoke the rune, which then has a chance of charming the creature and incapacitating them.
Once you reach level 7, you can pick up the Hill Giant Rune, which gives you resistance to poison damage and advantage on saving throws against the poison condition, but you can invoke it as a bonus action to gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage for 1 minute. Pretty good there.
Yeah. The Storm Rune gives you advantage on your Arcana checks, and you can no longer be surprised. As a bonus action, you can invoke the rune entering a prophetic state for 1 minute. Once you're in this state, you can use a reaction to change any attack roll, ability check, or saving throw to either having advantage or disadvantage as long as the creature is within 60 feet of you.
Because you're in the prophetic state for 1 minute, this means that each turn during that minute, you can use this reaction ability. So basically it means for 1 minute, once per turn, you can hand out either advantage or disadvantage to any roll. If you want to get advantage on your attack rolls, you can. But if you want to give that bad guy disadvantage on a saving throw against the wizard spell, you can do that too.
Or if you want to pair this with the Fire Rune and give them disadvantage to escape from your fiery shackles, you can do that as well.
So you gain all these runes, and as you level up, you gain them. But you actually get another ability at 3rd level as well. This is called Giant's Might, and it is another ability that you invoke as a bonus action. And this one, if you are not a large-sized creature, you become a large-sized creature. You get advantage on strength checks and saving throws, and once per turn when you hit with a weapon attack, you deal an extra d6 points of damage. So this ability, you just invoke it, and you are large and in charge for a minute.
At 7th level, you gain Runic Shield, which allows you to use a reaction to have an enemy re-roll an attack roll. You can use this ability a number of times per day equal to your proficiency modifier.
At level 10, you gain Great Stature. You roll 3d4 and grow that many inches taller, and instead of rolling a d6 when you're in your Giant's Might state, you roll a d8 for your extra damage.
At 15th level, you gain Master of Runes, and now you can invoke each of your runes twice instead of once.
And finally, at 18th level, you become a Runic Juggernaut. When you activate your Giant's Might, you become huge, your reach increases by 5 feet, and your damage goes up to a d10 as an extra damage that you get on your attacks. So you are a giant. I just love the idea of being a halfling or a gnome.
Yeah.
And hulking out, because it's not your size increases by 1, it's however big you were before, you are now huge.
I think the halfling or gnome Rune Knight is hilarious and so fun to imagine at the table. Yeah. As we're getting into this, there are 2 pieces that I want to bring up. Number 1, I think this is a great subclass. Not only is the flavor and theme really cool, but all of the abilities here really speak to that flavor and theme and are really potent in their delivery. I think the different runes that you can do, the ways that you can combine them to some interesting effects, and the runes are really cool, but actually reading through this, they're kind of the extra gravy on the side of the rest of the really awesome options that this subclass has. The only thing that I kind of shrugged at was the whole ability where you gain a few inches in your height, which is fun, but I feel like they just wanted to add more text than just your dice goes up to a D8, because that felt too limiting. But I wish there was something a little more interesting added in than just, oh, you gained 4 inches of height. Congratulations. So other than that, though, everything here is incredible. The one thing I will say is that this does cause a bit of a jumble of what you're going to do with your bonus action and reaction. There are a lot of options here. Now, on one side, that jumble can be confusing, and it might be hard to decide what is the best option at any given moment. But I also think of when I'm a spellcaster. One of my favorite things to do when I'm a spellcaster at the table is, while everybody else is taking their turn, I'm flipping through my spells, looking at the battlefield change, and trying to decide what is the most potent spell to drop on my next turn to change the outcome of the battlefield. And I feel like as a Rune Knight, you actually kind of have that same toolbox where all of these abilities, you're like, all right, I have an action, a bonus action, and a reaction. Which is going to be the most impactful in the moment? And although that can be cumbersome, it also is a really versatile and wonderful option to play with.
I don't know, because I feel like as a Rune Knight, the biggest challenge that you're going to run into is that you want to get big. You definitely want the Hill Giant rune, because the resistance, the combination of getting big and the Hill Giant rune is basically almost like a Barbarian Rage.
Yeah.
And then the prophetic state of the Storm Giant is amazing, because the way that you can, being able to throw out disadvantage as a reaction is really, really good too. But the thing is all 3 of those abilities take a bonus action to activate. So if you're in combat, you just roll for initiative. It's like, which one do you start first? Then which one do you do next? And then which one do you, like, what is the order of activation? Because you can't activate all 3 of those at the same time. Yeah. And it's not going to be until the 3rd round of combat that you have all of those rolling together. So it's really kind of weird, because it's almost like the subclass doesn't want you to put all your eggs in one basket, but you really want to put all your eggs in one basket, because being a big giant resistant to all damage, handing out advantage and disadvantage as a reaction, and doing all these things at the same time sounds really, really good. I think it is really, really good.
This is riding the line.
Yeah.
It's riding the line between A and S. And that's...
It's a lot of self-buffs. Like, you really buff yourself up with this class.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had here. Really the only drawback, the only thing that's making this a question on whether it's A or S, is that jumble of bonus action uses. And you can't activate all of your abilities in most combats. Usually by the 3rd round, you're kind of on the last rings of the combat.
You're on mop-up phase. Like, unless it's like the end game boss battle, like, that happens like a couple times in every adventure over the course of the whole campaign. Like, I find in 5th edition, most combats are over by round 3 or 4. So you only get 1 round of the good stuff where everything's happening at the same time. So maybe it's better to spread out your abilities and not go for that. And it is better to just try to rely on having something happening in each time rather than all of them happening at each time. So maybe in that mindset, this is still pretty strong, right? And straight up, just being able to get resistance to all weapon damage as a fighter alone, like, that ability on its own is really good.
You get all the benefits of being a fighter.
Yeah.
But with this, like, added almost barbarian-esque flavor.
Because, like, the thing that people love about the Barbarian Rage is the resistance to damage, right? It's yes, you get a little bit of extra damage, and you get the some other things, but the resistance to weapon damage is what a lot of people are here for.
And you can kind of swap these runes out as needed, which does give you that versatility. It's a really versatile class. It's a really potent class. It does have a lot of choices that you're going to be making. So I think this is geared towards a more mechanically minded player who is analyzing the battlefield and figuring out what is going to impact it the most. But even if you're just having fun, choosing one of these abilities and whipping it out on a whim is still going to be great. So,
but like, you're going to be a really good tank because, again, you can wear that heavy armor, you can put on a shield, you can make yourself big, and just the ability to make yourself big kind of puts you in this position where you are more of a presence on the battlefield in an interesting way, and then you're resistant to you gain the resistance to damage.
I also want to throw out there that if we are moving beyond combat, we have seen for a fact from our Eldritch Knight in our campaign, who has Enlarge Reduce, that casting Enlarge on yourself is actually a major problem solver.
Yeah.
Just in our recent game, casting Enlarge on her to up her abilities in her strength, she was ripping doors off hinges, smashing through walls. Like, she made escape routes for us when we needed to get out of there. She solved problems by doing that. So when I see this class involving you getting like those benefits to your strength and making yourself bigger, even outside of combat, the implications of what you can do as an extra big, extra strong character, you can solve a lot of issues. So,
and there's a lot of the passive abilities of the runes are giving you advantage on a lot of skill checks.
Yeah.
Like, you are getting a lot of non-combat perks, and it's just flat out, here, have advantage on this skill check. So I think that this is giving you, you know, when we compare it to, say, a Battle Master, who it's like all action all the time, we've actually got a lot more out of combat utility here.
So in that respect, I think that the reason why we love the Battle Master so much is the versatility and different options that you have at your disposal when building a Battle Master. You can do so much really potent things with it. But most of them are combat focused, and this one has those same elements that we love about the Battle Master, but spread throughout all of the gameplay options.
And it is weird because, again, you know, we just criticized the Psi Warrior for not having enough options, and this is one where you've only got 6 different runes. And for some reason, these all feel way more impactful, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, yes, your options are limited, but you're choosing between like some really top shelf options here. Whereas with the Psi Warrior, it's like, here's an extra D6 damage. Whereas these are like actually fully fleshed out abilities that you're choosing from.
And they all have passive options as well.
Exactly.
So like, again, the Psi Warrior, you're like choosing in the moment, here's a nudge in the right direction. Whereas this, you're choosing options that are going to ripple through your exploration, possibly maybe social encounters. There are some that will add to your deception or other abilities like that. So better social encounters, better exploration. And then on top of that, you can invoke the runes to amplify other potent things in combat.
I will, though, carry that criticism of the Psi Warrior through. This subclass would have been way cooler with probably twice as many runes.
I can agree to that. Making you choose rather than just asking which one don't you want.
That would have made the choice meaningful, whereas it feels kind of like you're going to take the Storm rune and the Hill Giant rune and kind of, it's like YOLO the rest. Like, the other runes, the Frost, Fire, Stone, and Cloud, they're cool, but they do feel kind of inconsequential compared to those 2 7th level runes. So I feel like this is a class that would have benefited from a little bit more thought as to the different runes, and it didn't have, like, because it married itself to having, you know, the corresponding to the different giant types. You know, there's more than just the 6 giant types. Like, there's Death Giants, there's Eldritch Giants, there were a whole bunch of other giants that have existed throughout the history of D&D. And it would have been cool to have runes for them, too. Or runes that maybe weren't associated with other things.
Even like, higher level runes that maybe spoke to, like, the lords of those giants. Like, the leaders.
Yeah, it feels like there should have been a rune that required you to be, like, 10th level and 15th level before taking them, but then it kind of has this weird cutoff. It feels very incongruous, almost a little half-baked, which is ironic because overall I think this is like an A+ and borderline S.
That's actually the question, and I'm actually having a hard time right now, and we haven't even set our rankings yet, because I still haven't fully decided in this moment whether I'm giving it the S tier or the A tier.
Like, it kind of gets into the S tier just giving a fighter damage resistance alone. Like, I feel like just getting big, getting resistance to all damage, it's kind of like You know, one of the most natural multi-classes for many fighters is just taking 1 or 2 levels of Barbarian. And this feels like, yep, well, you want to take 2 levels of Barbarian.
You don't have to.
You don't have to.
I'm willing to nudge this into the S tier. It does have its issues, but
I feel like it carves its niche in the S tier.
It's like just peeking its head into the S tier, being like, "Hey, can I come to this party too?" And I think I'm a generous host, and I'm willing to invite it.
The Echo Knight and the Battle Master can be like, yeah, you know, this guy's pretty. This guy's the next big thing.
You know, 2 people hanging out isn't really a party, but now that we're inviting the Rune Knight in, now it's a party in the S tier. So now we have several options that are really potent in play, and I think the Rune Knight is one of the coolest and most interesting options for a fighter. So I think S tier. Let's go with it. Let's do it.
Yeah, it feels a bit generous, but it's really good.
It is.
Yeah.
And I just really enjoy everything that this subclass offers. There are those things that we mentioned, but I mean, there's nothing bad here. There's nothing that takes away from the class. Everything here adds meaningful and potent options to the class as a whole and excels the fighter into new realms that boost what the fighter already does in meaningful and impactful ways. That is what we look for in an S tier, and I think I'm willing to do that.
And honestly, like, style points for if you do play a gnome Rune Knight. If you're playing a gnome Rune Knight right now, I want to hear about your character.
So with all of that, here are the rankings for our fighters, all of the subclasses presented so far in 5th edition. Let's talk about what the community thought.
So we had over 6,000 people respond to our community poll for the Tasha's subclass rankings. And when we look at what they gave the Psi Warrior, only 16% gave it an S tier ranking, but 42.6% gave it A, and 34.2% gave it a B, with 6.1% giving it a C, and just a sliver for D tier rankings. Less than 50 respondents gave it a D tier ranking. You know, I think the community liked the Psi Warrior more than we did. I think that it is pretty good. And as you said, you had a good time playing it.
Yeah.
Definitely a bit of a leaning towards the B side of A here, but pretty conclusively well received from the community.
I think what's really interesting, though, is that when we look at the Rune Knight, which gets a 38.5 for S tier, again, most prominently is the A tier with 41.1%, and then the B tier gets a 16.4%. And C and D tier basically get very little to almost none. What's interesting about both of these subclasses is we gave the Psi Warrior a B and we gave the Rune Knight an S. The community gave both an A. But if you look, the Psi Warrior is an A that leans heavily towards the B side, whereas the Rune Knight is an A that leans heavily towards the S side. So I do feel like, and both of them we actually said, like, the Psi Warrior was almost an A that kind of slipped into the B for us, and the Rune Knight was almost an A that just nudged itself into the S. So I think we're actually really close with the community rankings here. I think that just the median is that both of these are great subclasses to play, and they both are really potent and well received, and I like both of them.
And I think ultimately one of the big things that I like about both these ones is that you can take them in a lot of different directions. I think both are pretty melee oriented. Yeah. I don't think you're necessarily going to pick these for a ranged fighter. I'd be curious to see if anyone feels differently about that, but they do feel very melee oriented. Both of them feel like characters that would do very well with either two-handed weapons or shields or like a variety of fighting styles. I think would all work here, which is another like feather in their cap, because I think that, you know, it builds on that just general versatility that fighters have as a whole. One of the things that we did ask the community as well is how many had actually tried playing one. And this is a thing that I also think is pretty indicative of how the community response here is, because 19% of our overall respondents had said that they had played a Rune Knight in at least one game session, whereas only about 9% had said that they played a Psi Warrior. So the Rune Knight is definitely the more popular archetype.
Yeah, and that is important because also, I mean, I think that kind of speaks to the flavor and theme as well as the potency of the abilities that were read. A lot more people read the Rune Knight, liked what it was offering, and gravitated towards that.
Yeah. So overall, though, I think that compared to the other Tasha's subclasses that we've looked at so far, I think the power creep here for the fighter is not as strong as the others. These actually feel, both of these subclasses feel right where they should be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you look on screen right now, you're going to see the final rankings that we've given to all of the fighter subclasses. And next to that, you're going to see all of the community rankings for the fighter subclasses. And as Monty just said, I do think that these fighter subclasses do not push the power creep. Even though we're giving the Rune Knight an S tier, I think it still falls slightly below the other S tiers, which actually means that these are, in my opinion, great builds, really appropriate and really prominent and awesome options for the fighter as a whole. So this has been a look at the fighter tier rankings part 3 in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Tell us about your thoughts on these two subclasses in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider becoming a patron of our show by following the links in the description below.
And don't forget to check out our live play Shadows of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we have plenty more subclass tier ranking videos where we've gone through almost every class in D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.